Hi, I'm Dr. Dave Janda. Welcome back to Operation Freedom Briefings. The goal of these briefings in my weekly radio show, Operation Freedom, is to provide you information the bought-off, lamestream, fake media will not present. You can join us for the radio show. Every Sunday, it's live from 2 to 5 Eastern. We air the show out of the People's Republic of Ann Arbor at Wham Talk 1600's Freedom Bunker. Now, how to do that? All you have to do is go to davejanda.com, Sundays 2 to 5 Eastern. Hit the Listen Live button. It takes you to Wham Talk 1600 streaming service. Hit the play button. You're with us. Great guests, great analysis. In addition, obviously, we're on this YouTube channel, or YonTube, now that they have their new rules about what you definitely cannot speak about as it relates to what happened on November 3rd. We do those presentations on the analysis of what happened on November 3rd on our Rumble channel. Okay, go to rumble.com and then just type in Operation Freedom Channel. I upload one new presentation on that platform as well. We also have the website, davejanda.com, both the free as well as the subscription side, extra shows, extra content, archives to all the shows. Hope to become part of our Freedom family. The title of today's presentation is The Year of the China Rat. 2020 was the Year of the Rat for the Chinese New Year, and their theme for the kind of appropriate, isn't it? No, more than appropriate. I want to start this presentation with a quote from General Washington. This was a speech he gave before the Battle of Long Island in August of 1776. And here was his address, part of his address to the Continental Army. Quote, "The time is now near at hand which must probably determine whether Americans are to be free men or slaves, whether they are to have any property they can call their own, whether their houses or farms are to be pillaged and destroyed, and themselves consigned to a state of wretchedness from which no human efforts will deliver them. The fate of unborn millions will now depend, under God, on the courage and conduct of this army. Our cruel and unrelenting enemy leaves us only the choice of brave resistance or the most abject submission. We have, therefore, to resolve to conquer or die." End quote. That speech is as appropriate today as it was in 1776 because our enemy remains the deep state. Essentially, that's what the British Empire was and still is to this day. It's a huge component of the deep state, the globalist syndicate, the New World Order crowd, the criminal international banking syndicate, whatever you want to call it. Our enemy has not changed. And it's who we do battle with today. But the deep state has morphed beyond the British Empire at this point. The new empire that they actually created and embraced is the technocracy of China. Their goal is to make their model that they developed in China the model for the entire world, their New World Order, their globalist syndicate. The key to defeating that technocracy movement is that independent spirit that George Washington spoke about and then acting upon that independent spirit. So it should not surprise you that one of the chief technocrats, chief foot soldiers of the deep state, Anthony Fauci, despises the independent spirit in Americans and in anyone around the world. Why do I make such a... Oh, that's hyperbole. No, it's his own words. This from Paul Dubois from the Daily Wire. Dr. Fauci states, "American independent spirit made the pandemic worse." The pandemic that was unleashed on the United States and around the world by the technocracy of China. The rat. Dr. Anthony Fauci, director of the National Institute of Allergy and Infectious Disease, blamed America's tradition of individualism and independence for making COVID-19 pandemic much worse. Yeah. How about this? Here's what he's saying. When this pandemic was unleashed, and remember, Fauci, when he was still the head of this National Institute branch, under Obama, gave $3.5 million to that lab in Wuhan. And then in the first year of the Trump administration did the same. That lab that unleashed this bioweapon, because that's what it was, and willfully walked over onto our shores and to shores in Europe and the like. Well, it didn't quite have the effect they were looking for. You see, their goal was to absolutely destroy the entire economy of not just the United States, of the world, of the West. Their goal was to cause such societal disruption that the independent, the freedom-based societies could no longer function. Well, that whole destroying the economy, it took a huge, as we all know, and still does to this day, it took a huge hit into the United States economy and the economies around the world. But they weren't decimated. They might have been devastated, but they weren't decimated. And they were going for decimation, the year of the rat. And they did cause societal unrest, but not to the level that they thought they would cause, because they thought by unleashing this weapon on us, and remember, this is asymmetric, unrestricted warfare on behalf of the rat, China, which is just the puppet of the deep state syndicate that is present internationally in every country. So this deep state is not just United States based. Oh, no. No. This is an international gang. Let's call it an international rat pack. No offense to Frank Sinatra and Dean Martin and the rest of them. Fauci blamed America's tradition of individualism and independence for making the COVID-19 pandemic much worse. Yeah, not as worse as it could have been, unfortunately. This is what he's eulogizing, that what they did didn't decimate the world, so that everybody would come running with their open arms, save me, deep state, save me, globalist syndicate. He's lamenting that fact here. Speaking with the Washington Post this week, Fauci said that, quote, independent spirit in the United States of people not wanting to comply with public health measures has certainly hurt us a bit. What exactly wasn't complied with? I mean, if you look around the country, there's these surges now. Some of the places that have the biggest surges are places that had the most restrictive lockdowns and mask mandates. True. Look at the data. Everybody, you got to look at the data. You got to look at the science. Let's look at the data and science. And then they say, don't look at that. It's like with this election. Don't look at that. Hey, we just keep hiding in our basements. He goes on, quote, I was talking with my UK British colleagues who are saying the UK is similar to where we are now because each of our countries have that independent spirit. Oh, how terrible. He said that at the Washington National Cathedral. Quote, I can understand that, but now is the time to do what you're told, end quote. These technocracies are based on totalitarianism, communism. That's what they're all about. And he's laying it right here. In the same interview with the Washington Post, Fauci advised Americans to cancel Christmas. Oh, of course. Noting that he and his wife would not be hosting their daughters this year. In fact, cancel Christmas, but pay homage to me. Pay homage to me. In fact, the mayor of Washington, D.C. said, I'm making National Dr. Anthony Fauci Day on Christmas Eve. No, it's Christmas Eve. It's not Fauci Day. And by the way, if it's Fauci Day, what does that mean? We're all supposed to pass on bad information, worthless information, bogus information to 10 people we know, or we're supposed to hide in our basement, or we're supposed to pretend that Joe Biden isn't mentally inept, or we're supposed to, what else? I mean, that's all Fauci's about. And plus kneeling at the altar of the deep state of the technocracy movement. If that's what Anthony Fauci Day is, no thanks, I'll pass. This is the same guy. Remember, he's talking about us making the pandemic worse. Let me tell you something about independence. Let me give you some inside baseball. At the end of January of 2020, President Trump shut down travel on January 29th, 2020, to the United States from China. Fauci was against that. He was against it. And he was going around saying January, February, oh, this isn't a big deal. You don't need, this isn't a big. And then all of a sudden he flipped on a dime. Look, that was a planned flip. I truly believe with the recommendations he gave early, he was the one. He talks about us, the freedom lovers, the freedom fighters, making the pandemic worse. Sorry. The technocrats willfully made it worse. I've mentioned before my mom, the history teacher. One of the books she gave me to read, actually the first book she gave my dad to read after they got married, she's always giving you reading assignments, was Sun Tzu, The Art of War, who was arguably the greatest warrior in our civilization's history. Some would disagree with that, Alexander the Great, but Sun Tzu, up there, if not the guy. Here is something Sun Tzu said, and President Trump is a student of Sun Tzu as well. Quote, if you know the enemy and know yourself, you need not fear the result of 100 battles. Okay. If you know yourself, but not the enemy, for every victory gained, you will also suffer a defeat. If you know neither the enemy nor yourself, you will succumb in every battle. Part of the problem, folks, is that the enemy, the deep state, has been in stealth mode for so long, and those of us that have been calling it out, and I started calling it out the first broadcast I did on Operation Freedom, which was 10 years ago in October of 2010. That's when I got my public platform, and that's when I started calling out from the very beginning. And we were all labeled, all of us that spoke about that, as being conspiracy theorists, that fear mongers, that we were spreading fear porn. No, we were spreading the truth. And it might have been conspiracy, but it was conspiracy reality. You see, their goal was to hide themselves as the enemy for as long as possible. Now, because of independent media, I believe the enemy has been more defined, more outed. Part of the problem is many of the people that got to high levels of power within governments around the world were in fact compromised by the deep state. The conversation I had in 1988 with a very well-known political figure, when I first got to Washington to work on healthcare policy during the Reagan administration, took me aside and we were talking about people being bought off, paid off, bribed, controlled in the government, in Congress, in the House, in the Senate, their staffs, lobbyists, people in industries that had big government contracts. And at the time when I was talking to this individual, they told me that 95% of folks associated with Washington, D.C. were bought and paid for, bribed or blackmailed or controlled. That individual has since passed away, but I believe if I had that conversation with that individual today, that individual would tell me 99.9% of people are co-opted. And that's the enemy. And a number of folks that had risen to very high levels of power, even within the Trump administration, even them, they're constantly selling out the freedom movement. It's never ending. Never ending. A good example of that, if you did not see the interview I did with Patrick Byrne that we put up last Tuesday, please watch it. Now, part of that interview is on YouTube. Okay, it was a 38-minute interview. The first 18 minutes is on YouTube. Why not the last 20? Because when our IT team went through it and ran it through the filters, they told me that one, that video would not last an hour on YouTube before it would be taken down. And number two, that our channel would be completely taken down. We go to extreme lengths to do some things so that we can get our videos through. But the information in that interview with Patrick Byrne and what he presented about the sellouts that were occurring, and in particular, how President Trump has been sold out by the very people immediately around him that are obviously playing for the deep state, is yet an indication of not knowing your enemy and the ramifications it could have. So what we did with that interview, if you go to davejanda.com, it's in the blue box toward the top. It's the interview right next to my interview with General Flynn, which if you haven't seen that interview is must watch as well. Is the latest interview with Patrick Byrne. Hit that and you're there. And you'll see the whole interview, not just the first 18 minutes. But when many people are speaking about COVID, and they put Fauci in a position where he could, if you will, not only give us bad information, which he is notorious at doing, but he could actually run interference for China, the rat, where this all started from. You know, when I went to Washington in '88, I ended up spending time and working with Everett Koop, who was the then Surgeon General. Fantastic surgeon. He was a pediatric surgeon. He is a fantastic mentor, a fantastic physician, and a fantastic person. And here's a statement he used to make to me. You can't talk about the dangers of snake poisonings and not mention snakes. So let me translate that to 2020 terms. You can't mention the dangers of COVID and not mention China. And notice all these deep state puppets. They'll talk about COVID and they'll rattle it around, boogeyman, boogeyman, but they won't talk about the boogeyman, the rat, China. Peter Navarro, who I believe is one of the most feared people that the deep state have targeted, in addition to General Flynn, Sidney Powell, Donald Trump, even Patrick Byrne, and plus anybody in the independent media. They come after us like you can't believe. Here's what Peter Navarro said. The Chinese Communist Party must be held accountable for infecting the world with a deadly virus. He's calling out the snake. Not just the snake bite, but the snake. And pay the cost they have imposed on America. We need a presidential commission like the Kennedy Assassination Committee to implement this. Now, he tweeted that, and I tweeted back, exactly. China unleashed, and remember, what I started calling this coronavirus thing back in January 2020 was the freedom-stripping virus. Okay? But China unleashed the freedom-stripping virus on its own people as the freedom movement surged from Hong Kong to their mainland. And then they walked it into the United States and Western Europe to take down the world's economy, and in particular the United States economy, and set up the fraud for November 3rd. You see, folks, that when COVID hit, many of us were saying, okay, there's another shoe that's going to drop here. And that other shoe was the election and them stealing the election. You see, the goal here with COVID was not only to decimate the economy, to suppress people, to oppress people, to run a psyops operation, almost like a big prison or a war camp. But the other aspect of this, was to change election laws, to implement the mail by vote, to set up so that when the count occurred, you can't come within 100 feet of other people, let alone 6 feet if we're counting ballots. This was all predetermined and pre-planned. And this was the enemy's goal and objective. Their goal was to remove Donald Trump and the freedom-based people that were around him that hadn't been infiltrated by the deep state. And they failed with their initial launch of that virus on our society, which is why they hid Basement Joe, never campaigned, pulled in big crowds of 15 people when he spoke, because they had it all planned of what they were going to do. This is a multi-centric, multifactorial, criminal takedown of our election system. And their players had infiltrated at all levels of the government. The federal government, the state governments, the local governments. They infiltrated the staffs of all these levels of government. They infiltrated businesses, as we've spoken of before. They infiltrated, obviously, the education system. The media is bought and paid for by the deep state, the technocracy movement. They've infiltrated all of that. They have their choke points where independent information is blocked. Just look at the interview we did with Patrick Byrne. Information that Sidney Powell and General Flynn and Patrick had been providing to the president, or thought they had been providing to the president, to people that they thought were loyal to the president, when they were in that Oval Office meeting on December 18th and said, "Mr. President, we've provided this information to you." And he looked at them and goes, "I haven't seen it." He never got it because of the choke points. And this is very similar to what I experienced almost 4 years ago when we were dealing with healthcare reform. Remember, back in healthcare reform, at the very beginning of the Trump administration, they were going to take out Obamacare. And then they were going to replace it with something Paul Ryan, globalist little dweeb, wanted to put in. Look, Ryan's owned and operated, okay, period. Well, people like myself were looking through Ryan Care. This is essentially baby Obamacare. And we said to the president, and we got the information to the president, if you sign this, and he was starting to push it. Why? Because he was getting advice from those around him that were part of the deep state. They wanted to take Obama's name off of it and put Trump on it, call it Trump Care, and have it all fall apart and then blame him. And that's what we were trying to tell him. And I can tell you, we were hitting choke point after choke point, and we knew that, and I realized it, having been in D.C. since '88, and knowing what happens when you get information to the boss, whether that boss is Reagan or President Trump. It was obvious he wasn't getting that information. So we had to find different ways to get him that information. And when we did, he backed off of Ryan Care, much to the benefit of our country. But many people say, well, that's, and I was saying at the time, there are people that have infiltrated all the way into the Oval Office. And people say, that's conspiracy, Dave. Dave. No, it's true. And look, it finally came out through Sky News in Australia. Surely didn't come out through Fox or any of these. And again, Fox, not part of the solution, not part of the answer. They are part of the problem. Their board, members of their board sits on the Council on Foreign Relations, a globalist think tank and implementation tank. But this came out from Sky News. Major leak exposes members and lifts the lid on the Chinese Communist Party. A major leak containing a register with the details of nearly 2 million Communist Chinese Party members has occurred, exposing members who are now working all over the world, while also lifting the lid on how the party operates under Xi. What's amazing about this database is not just that it exposes people who are members of the Communist Party and who are now living and working all over the world, from Australia to the US to the UK, but the leak demonstrates party branches are embedded in some of the world's biggest companies and even inside government agencies. Communist Party branches have been set up inside Western companies, allowing the infiltration of these companies by Communist Chinese Party members, technocrats, deep state, who, if called on, are answerable directly to the Communist Party, to the chairman, and to the president himself of China. Along with the personal identifying details of 1.95 million Communist Party members, mostly from Shanghai, there are also details of 79,000 Communist Party branches, many of them inside companies.